jumping in, but Leon will be here in a second. Hi, I'm David True. Those of you who have been to an NYPAY, who have not been to an NYPAY event before. Okay, that's great. That's great to see you now. How did you guys find out about this? Email or friends told you or what?
Gary's list.
Oh, really? Okay, good. Because we're always trying to think of ways. Now, NYPAY, we pride ourselves on having interactive events, so if you have a question during the event, don't hesitate. It's not Q&A afterwards, but we talk during it. This is a topic we wanted to talk about for a while because you see so much news about jurisdictions saying that merchants have to continue accepting cash. So it's a very apropos conversation. First, I'd like to, but before I kick it over to Andy here, I would just like to thank Davis Wright Tremaine for hosting us and sponsoring NYPAY. And then there's a few NYPAY members here who are actively involved. Put your hands up, guys. Okay, so these are folks who make NYPAY happen. And we get together and ideas for events and things of that nature. So if you have any interest, if you find these things interesting and there's a topic you'd like to discuss, just make yourself known, and it's not a lot of lift. But it's a fun way to have a good discussion. Doesn't take too much time and you learn something. So I think that is all I needed to say. Again, I think I'll then turn it over to our moderator from Davis Wright Tremaine, Andy Lawrence.
Thanks, David. Cool. Thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to be moderating a panel, especially a panel of such luminaries on this really interesting topic. And I'm grateful that you all made the time to come out tonight. And I know that these audiences are always super engaged, and that's one thing that makes these events such a highlight for me to participate in. So I would echo David's remark that we really do we treasure that engagement, and we welcome those interruptions at any point, and we may ask you some questions as we go. So Devin will be, she told me unfortunately she got subway car stopped and then she's trapped in a cab, so I think she'll be here any minute. It sounds like quite an adventure getting here to
I had the subway part, but I didn't actually made it without having to go to a cab, so.
Yeah, okay. So you're not the only one. So I think we'll, I wanted to start, I thought, with just a quick round of introductions. I guess we'll let Devin do that. I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm a partner in DWT. I'm resident in the DC office. Spend a fair bit of time up here in New York and particularly on the West Coast in the Bay Area, because among my clients are a lot of what we call fintech clients and unicorns. So our clients sort of cluster around depository institutions, big and small, technology companies, big and small, non-depository, financial institutions like money transmitters, big and small, and then everybody who's playing around, different parts of the four-corner payment system, and then the odd retailer. Some of them are odd, some are even, but anyway, retailers here and there. So I co-chair our fintech, what we call a fintech working group, which for us is a cross-practice group organization. We have privacy and security lawyers, we have technology lawyers, and we have the geeky banking lawyers like me. That's really my specialty. So why don't we go through the panelists and let them introduce themselves as we start off. We can start with you, Matt.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. I guess my name is Matt Homer. I work for a company called Plaid. If you're not familiar with Plaid, Plaid is a data infrastructure company that provides data transfer portability functionality for the fintech ecosystem. So about a quarter of American bank accounts have connected through Plaid to use fintech type products. So for example, if you have Venmo or other similar apps on your phone, you've probably linked those fintech products to an underlying checking or savings account, and there's a good chance that you've used Plaid to facilitate that connection. But I've worked in kind of the fintech financial inclusion space for a while, also at the FDIC and then at USAID, where I was focused on emerging markets and did a lot of work around cashless cities in India.
Should I just go for it?
Eric, please, yeah.
All right.
On to you, Eric.
So my name is Eric Noggle. I'm the Senior Director of Research at the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion, which is based in Washington, D.C. If you're not familiar with Axion, our bread and butter as an organization is impact investing, largely into fintechs and into some traditional MFIs. At the Center for Financial Inclusion, we joke that we're the halo of Axion because we focus on all the things that our impact investors and sort of internal technical team doesn't have time to pay attention to. So we do a lot of work around governance, consumer protection, and then my team is the research team. So we do a lot of work looking at consumer behavior is a big thing, doing a lot of work right now on financial health, behavioral science principles and their role in product design, and then sometimes we touch a variety of other fun topics. And so we spent a lot of time over the years thinking about why consumers pick different payment methods, and what do they do when they do that, and why do they make those choices. And most of our work is in emerging markets, and so we'll have some crossover into that space as well today.
Hi, I'm Leon Perlman. Thanks very much to NYPAY for inviting me back. It's good to see a lot of old friends and some new friends. I head the Digital Financial Services Observatory at Columbia Business School, which I also founded. So I am a techie lawyer with quite a bit of entrepreneurial background, so I bring the spectrum of things into play. So we work on the regulation and policy around digital financial services, which is primarily the transactional component of in a lot of emerging markets using a very basic phone. Just inside. A basic phone as your payment instrument. And in that role, I work on money laundering, anti-money laundering, not money laundering. Speak to me. Actually, speak to my lawyer.
That's a different panel. The money laundering panel will be
That's the dark web panel, right?
And that would be only
that's tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow,
Okay.
yeah, yes. But not here,
Sorry,
actually. They thought about listening, but it takes them to decide.
So I work on cybersecurity, busy doing some cybersecurity risk management frameworks. And what I do internationally and into close to 90 countries now, so I've seen the world, is work with a lot of regulators and specifically central banks and telco regulators on developing their policies and regulations or laws around digital financial services. So that can relate to anti-money laundering, cybersecurity, licensing, and a whole swathe or whatever that involves. So of late, I've got involved, as you're probably aware, in a lot of the blockchain world. So I do a lot of policy development around that, and writing a few regs for a couple of countries on their fintech sandboxes, which include blockchain work. And close to the stateside, I'm off to DC tomorrow to speak to Congress.
Oh, excellent. Which piece?
Blockchain. Yeah.
That, and what part of Congress are you going to address this?
Smart contracts.
And Financial Services Committee? Or
Yeah, the blockchain caucus.
Blockchain
Yeah.
caucus.
That should be super interesting.
What does that cut across from financial services into other sectors? I'm just
It's
curious.
a specific carve out, yeah. But we can speak about it later.
Is it the Senate or the House?
It's the House, yeah. Should be interesting, interesting round table. And it's bipartisan, so, and it won't be on C-SPAN.
We haven't found a way to make that a partisan issue, blockchain. Where's our creativity?
I'll get back to you on that.
I could have a food fight over blockchain. So we're delighted that Devina was able to make her way here, thanks to planes, trains, and automobiles. So Devina, if you'd like to take a couple minutes, and a few minutes, take your time to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Apologies everyone for being late. I'm not familiar with New York, so I didn't know that subways can get stuck underground for 30 minutes. Cabs don't always stop, so I felt like I was in the movies. It was, your classic trying to get to a meeting on time experience. So again, sincere apologies for being late. My name is Davina Kenna, and I work for the Financial Health Network, which was formerly the Center for Financial Services Innovation. We just changed our name last week. We are a nonprofit organization that works to bridge communities to, it's kind of hard to describe. We're not a think tank, we're not an advocacy group, we're sort of all of them. We have a network of many members actually, including Plaid, I believe, is now a member as well. And we work to try to build consumer financial health, empowering communities. We work with different nonprofit organizations. We have a financial solutions lab, which is sort of like an incubator. We have a cohort of about 5 to 10 companies every year that we mentor, that we provide funding for, and watch them grow. So the Financial Health Network hasn't really taken a specific role on cashless commerce, but I was still excited to come. I'm only about 6 weeks old at this organization. Prior to this, I worked for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I was there for about.
Did you see the change?
Which one?
Were you there before and after Trump?
I was there, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I was there before, so I was working on our payday lending rulemaking, which was very exciting.
Oh.
You were right in the thick of it, weren't you? Yeah.
Fun days.
Noted that, I didn't pick that up.
Did you get
Due diligence.
disbanded?
Yeah.
I was actually there for both phase one, what we called it World 1 and World 2. And I worked. I started during our notice of proposed rulemaking phase when we were meeting with industry, different advocacy groups to try to create the rules. So I watched the whole rulemaking process. And then, of course, we had a slight different regime change, and we were trying to push the rule out the door as quickly as we could before Rich Cordray left. We were successful, but when Mr. Mulvaney came in, there was a slight change in the direction that they wanted to take the rule. I chose to step off. We had the opportunity. If we didn't feel comfortable, we did not have to work on the rulemaking. So at this point, the rule is very much a watered down. It's mostly just a payments provision rule. So at that point, I had switched a little bit into auto lending. I was very interested in fair lending and how that works. And then I personally just felt like I got to a point where, as a policymaker, I felt like I could no longer be very effective. And I had worked with CFSI quite a bit in many capacities. And so an opportunity came along, and I'm very excited to try something new. But I do still meet with my CFPB colleagues every so often to see how they're doing, and I'll go blink once if you're okay. It was a great opportunity to see what happens during the presidential transition. So it was very unique. I think we all hope that, I try to remain optimistic that there could be a transition again in the next 2 years, and that hopefully we can go back and pick up some of the rules we were doing, and that hopefully they don't make too much progress on the overdraft changes and some of the other planned rulemakings that they have in mind.
For the rollback. I wish we could have gotten a sense for your point of view from the That was awesome, thank you. And I don't believe I oversold, right? I mean, it's a powerhouse panel. So you're gonna hear all these different and complementary overlapping, and hopefully some of these, points of view will be in tension. From the standpoint of a private practitioner, I'm always on both sides too of these issues. If it's a regulated client, of course, the regulation is the last, bulwark against the barbarians who want to, rip off the face of every consumer. If it's an unregulated institution, by golly, that stupid regulation that dates from the Federal Home Loan Act from 1930 is standing in the way of. I'll throw an example out that would probably resonate with Devin from the payday rule, the wage advance concept, right? Paying people faster is something that we should have been doing a long time ago, right? And we have much better tech to do it now. There are rules on the books statutes on the books that are 80 years old because, employers were doing bad things 80 years ago and way before that. And so it is very difficult at the state level to find your way through those kinds of things sometimes, even though the federal rule seems relatively accommodating. So it's a really interesting, from my standpoint, perspective from which to see these. Generally, philosophically, and my practice is generally on the side of trying to get the innovation through that thicket. So generally, something like a municipality legislating mandatory cash acceptance is not something that I, intuitively really, and for clients is really, in my opinion, the way to go. But you will hear all those different points of view from folks here, and and hopefully we'll hear from you. I have a colleague I want to give a call out to, Rich Sikowski in the room. Rich, can you raise your hand? He's my conscience, he's my minder. It's nice to see. But Rich has done some writings on the legislation that you can find on our blog, Payment Law Advisor, if you're interested. And I know there's a pretty rich vein of stuff out there on what municipalities have been doing. So with that, I think what I thought we would do is, at least to give us a kicking off point, we'll do a round of questions, and hear from each of the panelists, but again, please interject or offer a point of view, at any point, or raise your questions, because my questions aren't really the ones that matter. The ones that matter are the ones that are burning in your minds. So at any point, please do that. So I wanted to start off actually with Eric, and Matt had a somewhat related question, so kind of go in that order. But Eric, you raised kind of a fundamental question about the why behind these legislative efforts that I thought was really important to kind of get to. What's sort of the stated objective here? What are we trying to accomplish with this legislation of mandated cash acceptance? So, what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, why are you guys doing this?
That's as a researcher, right? I mean, like that's the first nerdy place I go to is trying to understand why people are doing the things that they're doing, right? So that's my immediate thing. And if you look at, I was doing some research in preparation for this. So obviously, Philadelphia just passed legislation to ban this. Massachusetts has had a law on the books since 1978. Turns out.
Oh wow!
Yeah, fun fact. That's your fun fact for your NYPAY event. Chicago's attempted to do this, but it hasn't gone very far. New Jersey as a state has passed a law, but it has not been signed by the governor for this. And almost in every one of those cases, it's all about discrimination, right? It's the idea that if you think about who would need to use cash, it's predominantly the underbanked and low income. And I'm of the opinion that if we're going to say that it's discrimination, we need to take a really hard look at whether that is a policy objective that makes sense or is accurate. Because not to get too far into the weeds too soon, but there's something like 8 million households that are considered underbanked by the FDIC. But there's 16 million that are on food stamps. And if you're on food stamps, you can't even use your stamp to buy prepared food, right? So when I hear like the mayor and council members of Philadelphia being like, well, it's a real shame that the guy behind me at Sweet Green can't buy a salad with his cash, I'm like, I think you're missing the point if you're really trying to tell me this is about discrimination. Because you're making all these other judgments about how people can control and use their money, in other spots too. So that was my initial reaction. Was like, why are we really doing this? Can we quantify the harm and actually show me that this is a policy that's actually going to make anything better or not?
Is the food stamp regulation, is that at a state level or a local level?
Federal.
Federal. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's some, obvious in terms of the jurisdictional breakdown, definitely differs. But there are other things like WIC, right, which states and cities do have a little bit more control over. And WIC is going to be, everybody's going to have a cashless option for WIC by 2020. All right. So I just sort of wonder, like, what's the real reason why we're bringing this up now in this way?
Mm-hmm. Do the acronym WIC?
Well, it's the it's one of the, I don't remember the full acronym. Women and infants and children benefit program.
Okay.
And that's a food program also.
Yeah, food and formula. Yeah.
Do the feds set the qualification standards for food stamps, or do the states have the ability to do that?
I am not a food stamp expert, unfortunately. I think most of it is set federally. I think that there are different benefits that obviously states can do also that they can provide, which they have more control over. But it is not an uncommon thing for prepared foods, hot foods, not to be included, which to me is kind of crazy, right? As an aside, I was in a store one time. The guy in front of me was clearly homeless, had gotten $5 or $6 or whatever it was, went to the hot bar because like, what's he gonna do if you give him like a bundle of kale and a raw steak, right? Like, what's that guy gonna do? And he got turned away, right? Because he had food stamps and he couldn't buy the food on food stamps. So rather than like give the hungry guy food, right, we've just like completely cut him out of the ecosystem with this other regulation. So I just don't think there's a lot of alignment in how the regulations are being laid out, and in terms of if we're really trying to discriminate against people or support people or whatever. It seems a little bit of a mess.
Asking for coherence in homeless policy is really like. I'm sorry.
If we try to get coherence at all in policy generally, I mean, we were talking about this before, right? There's all these different stakeholders that you have to you have to please. So it's not, at least, domestically in the United States, it's not always, it doesn't always make a lot of sense, unfortunately.
There are some fintechs working on this issue actually, and
Yeah.
some that are probably in your network, including a company called Propel, which I think is based in New York. They're trying to digitize food stamps.
Yeah.
So there's some interesting stuff going on.
Propel, like propeller?
Yeah, like just
Okay.
Propel.
Yeah.
But is the policy issue actually lack of access, so people don't have access to these instruments? Or is it more of a, I was gonna say almost privacy, should every transaction be electronic when it can be tracked?
I think that latter point is actually the more interesting regulatory question, but that's not the one, at least, that shows up in the newspapers that people are talking about. It's almost always like discrimination of the underbanked, and I'm like, well, if that's the argument that you're gonna make, there's a whole bunch of issues that we can talk about when it comes to like inequality and like low-income households that should probably take precedence over whether they can like buy a salad or not.
Yeah, I feel like that's depending on your point of view, a benefit or a drawback of mandating cashless. I don't think it's animating any of the actual legislation. I feel like what's animating is what you identified initially, right? Which is purportedly an effort to help these people, and that, which you can gets my point of view from purportedly, right?
Yeah.
I'm not buying it.
In New York City, the councilman, Richie Torres, who introduced the legislation, comes from one of the poorest districts in the entire city and one of the largest unbanked groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is that the reason we have so many unbanked is that the inverse, the poorer you are, the more expensive the financial services are, the less you can afford them. And I think it's not so much that Sweet Greens wanted to go cashless, but the fact of a trend and seeing more and more merchants who are going cashless, and I think that's at least in New York City, where it comes in. Originally, the Richie Torres bill was kind of the inspiration for this event.
And we have
Yeah, I mean,
a solution for the subway. Nobody pays for the subway with cash at the turnstile. So to me, it's a very analogous issue. Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But you could pay with cash.
You can pay with cash
Yeah,
at one
like-
time.
Yeah, but then you get stored
At
value,
the
right?
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could do the same at CVS, take $1,000 in cash, get an anonymous prepaid card, walk
Yeah,
across the
but
street.
there's a fee, which, and if you're
Yeah.
doing micro instrument levels, like I'm putting in $10, then that fee becomes an exorbitant tax.
Yeah.
That's part of, I mean, I think that is part of the model, is that our financial services models aren't structured in a way that allows for ubiquity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That's,
right.
that's the problem.
I'm a little new to this issue, so if I may go off course, but I'm a little bit confused because my understanding for many people who get assistance on their cards, et cetera, it's already electronic. So if I'm putting money on a card, it's already electronic. I don't know why you need a piece of paper in your hand to pay. And if there's a fee, we subsidize a lot of things, subsidize the damn fee. I don't, obviously I have a point of view, but
Yeah.
to me that is
Yeah.
more suggesting that people that don't make a lot of money are not smart enough to spend their money. And, obviously I have a point of view, but it's the same to me, I think the subway point is good, it's the same with recycling and the plastic bags. That was gonna be a regressive tax. Give everyone who gets food support, give them however many recyclable carry bags they need.
Just wait till the
They
zone-based
have
pricing on
to be
subway comes in.
responsible.
Well,
I don't.
you know, in Sorry. Hong
Just
Kong
wait
and
till the
London,
zone-based pricing on subways come in.
in Hong Kong and London, they invented these cards, and then they started accepting them at merchants.
The
So-
Oyster card.
Yes,
Yeah.
so why don't
Speak
you,
up.
the
If you
Oyster,
could.
yeah, the Oyster,
So we can-
the Oyster card in Hong Kong, and there's a similar card, it's also a seafood thing in
Oh,
London.
Oyster card, Singapore.
Okay, in Hong Kong.
Hong
And
Kong,
so
okay,
it started
sorry.
with the
It's a
subway
big-
and the transit, and then it migrated out to small merchants. So I don't see why we couldn't take the Metro card and accept it at Amazon Go or Sweetgreen.
This goes down a whole path of smart enabled cards. I mean, that's a big thing in Europe right now is smart cards, right? So you get your national identification card, it's smart enabled, you can link it to your bank accounts, you can start using it everywhere, and it's a one card for everything sort of solution. That has driven down cash use, and like in Sweden, it's something like 18% of people like have used cash in the past year or something. I mean, it's shocking to the degree to which it drives
So they have a government issued card in Sweden?
Yeah, I mean, it may have been Sweden and Estonia has one too. Estonia's pushing an entirely cashless system. But a lot of the European countries now have at least a chip-enabled card. And then that chip.
About the ID document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's being-
Sorry, what was that?
The ID document.
I didn't
Chip.
see that. I didn't see that.
They also have smart cards for health, which we don't have.
But yeah, they're a little bit more advanced in a number of ways. They also have fewer potholes than we do.
Fewer square miles as well, so it's kind of
Yeah.
understandable.
So Matt, you had a sort of a related sort of take on the question that, from the standpoint of what are we trying to solve for, that I thought was interesting. Want to articulate that a little more?
Yeah, and I mean, and just maybe I can start kind of with the story as well. I mean, so if you guys remember, I mean, picking up on what Davina was talking about, if you remember kind of November 8th a few years ago, it was like an election. But the same day of that election, India's prime minister decided to remove 80%, more than 80, yeah, 83% of the currency from circulation. So I was at the time I was at USA and I was in London. I was watching these election results and felt like my world was totally changing. And then realizing I was then going from London to India and thinking, oh, now I have to like kind of represent my government, right? Like,
you were having a good day.
And I was wondering, like, okay, like, how I think about it. So I wasn't really paying attention to the news out of India. I took no cash with me whatsoever. I got to Delhi, and there were lines in the airport at every ATM, and then the lines quickly dissipated because there was no money left in the ATMs. I was then taking a connecting flight to a town called Amritsar, and in Amritsar, I had to call the hotel in advance and say, I can't take a car because I have no cash, so I need you to send like a hotel car and I'll put on my hotel bill. The hotel came and the driver got me. We drove around looking for an ATM, and like literally every single bank, there were just lines of people out, right, trying to get currency out. And then I couldn't eat anywhere because I didn't have any. I mean, I could eat at McDonald's, so I ate most of my meals at McDonald's, and then at kind of one of the Sikh temples there because you can like eat for free. So like I was eating at McDonald's and then the temple.
No fancy hotels to go to.
I just mentioned that example because like it speaks to sort of unintended consequences. So I mean the reason that the stated reason for doing this was to get rid of black currency or sort of things that were illegal activities in the marketplace to kind of suck the currency out of those. But at the end, like I think like 96% of the currency that was taken out of the system somehow got back in the system, right? So the idea was that the bad guys couldn't get it back in, but they found a way to get it back in, right? But I think it speaks. So it was an interesting experience because I couldn't really use digital payments because like very few people accepted digital payments, but I also couldn't use cash, right? Like I couldn't really do anything. And then in Washington D.C. last year, Washington D.C. was also considering a cash ban, and I wrote a letter to the editor about it, just given a lot of my work in India had been focused on promoting a cash-led economy, recognizing that that's more of an aspiration. I think realistically we're not going to be we're not going to have a cashless city, at least in this country, for a pretty long time, and I think that's fine, right? I think it's more of a North Star toward a cash-led economy is what a lot of people are interested in. To me, I mean, just picking up on what Eric was saying, I think we need to focus on what problem we're trying to solve, and I think that we should recognize that financial inclusion is a problem, and we should make it possible for people to participate in the economy. But the way I think there's sort of two ways to solve that. If you're thinking about payment to point of sale, one way is to require merchants to accept cash. The other way is to sort of make it possible for everyone to participate in the digital economy. And to me, I think efforts to ban cashless stores is really sort of misguided. It's solving the wrong problem. And really, what should be focused on is making it just as easy to participate in the digital ecosystem as it is to participate in the cash ecosystem. And so, I mean, I think that just picks up on the themes we've been talking about with having more store value cards and things like that.
I would agree with that. I think this whole issue gets at the bigger issue of that we have, 7% of US households that are unbanked that don't have access to these products. I personally don't believe that that banning merchants from being cashless solves that problem. I think the bigger problem is how do we give more households access to these digital services. So I was looking at China because I was interested to see how they've gone almost completely cashless. I think by 2023 they're projected to be completely cashless. I was trying to understand how they made that transition, and there were two things. One, China sort of leapfrogged our debit card, credit card revolution. They never really were in that environment. They went straight from cash to cashless. And two, they did have the same concerns that we have as people living in rural areas and agricultural areas who did not have access to digital currency. So what they did is I encouraged authorities to bring internet access to these rural agricultural areas. They worked with Alibaba and a couple other large companies to find ways so that farmers could sell their produce online so that they could still participate in the economy. And they found that I think it was something like 68% of those living in those rural agricultural areas already had access to digital payments. And as an aggregate, China was something like in the mid-70s percentage. So I thought that was interesting that one, they didn't have the same issues that we have in our form of payments, but two, they targeted that actual problem before trying to implement this cashless society. I don't know if that's something that we can do here, one, because we have so many issues that aren't as simple, two, our government is structured completely differently, and three, we just simply have a completely different economy. But I always think that's interesting. I feel like they're going about it kind of putting the horse before the cart.
It's interesting to think about China from the privacy perspective. Certainly it facilitates control, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So why don't we talk a little bit more? Leon, you have a lot of experience to share about the international scene in this respect. Are there thoughts you want to lob in from that?
Actually, Matt's story about India reminded me of my first trip to China, where China's the variety of goods on sale there are unbelievable. So I went to a big box store with my cart, and oh my god, everything's so cheap. And I went around literally filling this thing up, and even put in a new suitcase to fill it up, and then got to the register, the point of sale, and out came my Visa card, and in Chinese, I got this, not, and the cashier pointed at the QR code reader. So I was out of luck. So I literally spent 45 minutes shopping and got nothing. And they didn't accept cash. Huh? I was financially excluded. As I am at the bodegas here, would not take my credit card unless I spent $10 plus another 2.5%.
Gotta cover those costs.
Gotta cover those costs. Yeah. So you pointed out to the leapfrogging exercise, and that you'll speak to this too. Is that's where the rest of the world, the non-OECD countries, as I call the developing world these days, just as a shorthand, have gone simply because nobody's looked after the poor. So they had to make a plan. First, mobile-centric countries that basically leapfrogged and added transactional services to their poor was in the Philippines in 2001. And then the whole thing got accelerated with the development of something everybody's probably heard of, M-Pesa, M for mobile, M-Pesa for money, which is Swahili word for money in Kenya. Yeah. And that everybody thinks that Kenya was where the idea was born. It was actually the Philippines who had the idea. And what happened then is just accelerated. Actually, around 2006, 2007, coincided with the financial crisis where non-banks were the big bad wolves in the world. So what happened is, as this thing started percolating out, a lot of regulators stepped in and put the brakes on it. Says non-banks, systemic risk, etc., etc. Now, what happened in Kenya, which is super interesting, why I actually got started, is their banking law. In effect, they didn't have a payments law, right? They had a banking law, which in effect said you can't do this. Because if you take money from the public, then you need a bank license. So Safaricom has started this, actually looked at the banking law and said, hang on, what does the banking law say about taking money as a deposit? So under the definition of deposit was you take money and you give interest. So their workaround was very simple: don't give interest. Okay, I mean it was as simple as that, a lawyer's dream, right?
No, we don't like simple. No.
It was just a 1 hour chargeable rate. Delete the delete the word interest.
Yeah.
But the flip side of it actually was that there was a very forward-looking guy at the central bank of Kenya who said, okay, technically speaking, the law says you can do it, but I've got an overall view of the payment system, and it's up to me. But he said, okay, I'm going to allow you in, but you need to give us monthly reports, etc., etc. So this thing really exploded in Kenya, and suddenly the banks, who were completely leapfrogged because this whole ecosystem was built, there were agents, guys on the umbrella taking the deposits without the interest. This entire ecosystem built up, and people started sending peer-to-peer payments and started doing bills, and then the banks woke up and said, what the hell is this? And they ran to the Minister of Finance and they said, look, this is a Ponzi scheme. And the Minister of Finance literally ran over to the central bank and said, you've got to stop this stuff. And Steve, who was the guy at the central bank, said, it's not a Ponzi scheme, here, all the audited monthly reports. There was the get out of jail free card. The rest is history. So a lot of countries have emulated this.
His name is Steve?
Steve. He's always a Steve.
The Kenyan central banker,
Yeah.
Steve.
Steve is famous. So they call him the father of mobile money, and then there's the guy from Safaricom who says he's the, I don't know, what's he?
Godfather.
Godfather. Yeah. So this was emulated, and as I said, as this grew, a lot of regulators said, whoa, systemic effects. So you had a bifurcated view of this, how this mobile centric, actually on feature phones, screw phones, still to this day, of how this should roll out. So a lot of, and these are microtransactions to some degree. So the transaction fees are created almost a percentage of the transaction, if there are transaction fees. So you've got to keep the transaction fees really low. And by doing that, you keep all the intermediaries out. So some regulators say, no, we want banks involved in the transaction because they provide the safety and soundness, etc. So that, in countries where that was mandated, that a non-bank doing this kind of mobile money, digital financial services, had to partner with a bank that never took off. Okay, still to this day. Why? Is because very simple. You add complexity, compliance. I mean, paperwork like crazy. India, when it started out, before it reformed itself, had layers of bureaucracy in this. It just didn't work. So they changed. They created this thing called payment banks, and other regulators around the world have then went from this bank-centric approach to basically a functional approach. As long as you're doing the service, you can